Okay, I'm going to put tip number 9 away because we've already talked about focusing on the one thing. It's time to write. So we're going to talk about some tips that are related to script writing. Tips number 26 through 34. 26 through 34. Tip number 26 is pencil it out. Sometimes you just got to put the laptop down. You got to step away from the computer and you got to go old school. Now, not everybody does this, but for me, that works sometimes when I got to break the rhythm. I love fountain pens. I love writing utensils. I love pencils. My favorite new find, and it's old, it's very old school, is these blue Flair pens. I love Flair pens from my childhood. And I use that now because it kind of inspires me. So sometimes you got to just pencil it out. Number 26, tip number 26, when you start to script write, use a manual typewriter. Do something that just kind of breaks the rhythm rather than just the typical laptop sitting there hammering it out. Now, I've written, in fact, let me show you. This is one of my old notepads or notebooks, and I've written out, gosh, I don't know how many radio commercials, the concepting things, and it's just the notebook. It's just by hand. That's where I've gotten my inspiration from writing. So, okay, enough of 26. Pencil it out. 27, ask for 60s. If you can, get a 60 rather than a 30. I know why radio stations like to sell 30s, and I know the value of 30s. I know why you do 30s. But if you can write, especially a humorous radio commercial, if you can get 60 seconds, almost all of my radio commercials that are humor-driven are 60 seconds in length. Sometimes I'll write a 60 and then I'll cut it down to a 30. But in fact, do this one time. Write a 60 and cut it down to a 30. And it seems like you've gone from 60 seconds to 15 seconds. So much seems to be emptied out of the spot. So if you can, when you're writing, see if you can get 60s from the client. Tip number 28, write real dialogue. Natural sounding dialogue is not necessarily what we're used to writing. Many times it's short, it's incomplete sentences, it's incorrect grammar. It's repetitive, and I don't know how many times I've seen what are supposed to be dialogue commercials, and they'll say, don't sound like an announcer, and yet what they've done is they've written announcer copy. There's a difference between announcer copy and real dialogue. Go into your Starbucks and listen to people. Put your phone down and record the conversations, and then go back and transcribe it. Not that you're actually going to do that. But you'll find that it's just kind of a mishmash of words. So write real dialogue. It's a real skill set. All right, tip number 29. This is hard. Come up short. I've done this long enough that I will use every quarter second of that 60 seconds. And yet I know in my heart that the best tip is to come up at 58 seconds for a 60. Write 58 seconds worth of copy. 27, 28 seconds worth of copy for a 30. It gives the opportunity to the actors to give a more relaxed, nuanced read. It's more creative. I did something the other day with Elizabeth, and it was tight. We came up short, and then she ad-libbed something at the end, and I wound up putting it in the commercial because it was such a great ad-lib. If we hadn't have come up short, I wouldn't have been able to stick it in, and it really made the commercial. So if you can, write them short rather than long. Now, don't write 40 seconds for a copy for a 60 and 20 for a 30. We've all seen that happen. It makes you look like okay, never mind. Tip number 30, give it a day. This is kind of like noodle on it, but write it, put it aside, look at it in the morning with fresh eyes. Not only will you see new typos, but you will look at it with fresh eyes and go, that's not working, or this needs to change at the end. So my suggestion is give it a day. If you've got a deadline, I know sometimes you don't have a day, but if you don't have a deadline or you've got 4 days out, write it, set it aside, and look at it in the morning. Tip number 31 is too many voices. I see commercials every so often and they've got too many characters. It's really hard to keep track for a listener if you have too many voices. I have found that kind of my limit is 3. Most of my commercials are 2 characters with an announcer tag if it's a humorous commercial. Sometimes it's 3 characters. Every so often it's 4 characters. In fact, we did a commercial I don't know, 6 months ago. Started with 3, and I brought the 4th character in about, I don't know, halfway through, and that worked. But you got to be very careful when you're writing, especially humorous dialogue spots. Too many characters, it's hard for a listener to follow. Tip number 32, make a hard copy. This kind of gets back to some of our other tips, noodling on it and giving it a day. Make a hard copy. I've found not only do you see typos with a hard copy, more so than on a computer screen, but for example, let me give you this example. Let me grab this script real quick. What I'll do many times is I will write something, and then if it's the second or third draft, I'll put a highlighter through it, and I'll stack it up, and I'll paperclip it, and I'll hang on to these, because if I don't have the hard copy, I don't know what I did in draft 1, and I'm on draft 4. Sometimes I save them, but sometimes I don't. I'm in the middle of writing something. Just burn off a hard copy, set it aside, and you've got it. And you can always go back to a gag or something you wrote in the previous version that you may have forgotten about. So I think it's good to make hard copies, stack them up. Tip number 33, be objective. You need to have somebody in your circle that can give you an objective response. Not just the client, but you need somebody who can give you an honest opinion. Now, as a warning, you don't need a million opinions. You just need a few opinions. And we've all got people that are our go-to people that we want their ideas on something that we've written. And many times what happens is if you let somebody else look at it, they'll throw an idea at you that you didn't think about, and you think, well, that's a good idea. That's happened to me. So be objective. Come up with other people that can give you an objective feedback on your script. Tip number 34 is, are we there yet? I've already talked about revisions and how I stack them up with hard copies. Sometimes you just got to revise and revise and revise. We've all been there probably where we've written something and the first thing out of the gate is just brilliant. Every so often that happens, but most of the time you got to revise it numerous times. And then you also know when it's time to put it to bed. It's done. Put it aside. Sometimes it's the deadline, but sometimes you've done the best you can, and it's time to put it aside. But don't be afraid to revise. It's not a bad thing to revise, okay? So those are my script writing tips for you. Next, we're going to look at producing and directing, okay? Producing and directing.